Evelyn Calloway, the daughter of a millionaire, defied her father's wishes when she married a waiter from the restaurant where she worked. But nothing could prepare anyone for what happened at the end of the ceremony. It left everyone speechless. Standing in her father's mansion, Evelyn gazed out through the enormous windows that stretched from floor to ceiling. The view of the world outside seemed so serene from up here. She could see the cars smoothly gliding along the streets of Charleston, and people walking with purpose. They appeared so free. Yet, inside the mansion's luxurious walls, Evelyn felt far from free. Despite being surrounded by unimaginable wealth, she felt trapped. It was like living in a gilded cage. A cage her father had carefully crafted over the years. Richard Calloway, a man who owned a massive restaurant empire, had given her every luxury in life. From the best education to the finest clothes, she had everything that money could buy, a life most people could only dream of. But there was one thing Evelyn longed for more than anything, and it couldn't be purchased. What she craved was freedom and love, untarnished by the pressures of wealth or the expectations of society. Her father's expectations felt like a constant, heavy burden she could never escape. Richard wasn't a cruel man, but he was a controlling one, with a clear vision of how her life should unfold. He dreamed of her marrying one of his wealthy business partners, someone who could enhance the family's legacy. The problem was, Evelyn had no interest in that. She didn't care about business deals or climbing the social ladder. What she wanted was to find her own way. Far from the world her father was so determined to keep her confined in. It was during one of the many social obligations her father had arranged for her, a charity event at one of his upscale restaurants, that her life took an unexpected turn. Sitting at a table surrounded by powerful figures, she had to force smiles and nod along as the conversation revolved around mergers and market shares. Bored out of her mind, she let her gaze wander across the room. And that's when she spotted someone new. He was standing by the bar, dressed simply in a white shirt with sleeves rolled up in black pants, nothing flashy. His dark hair was slightly tousled, and he carried himself with a calm, easygoing demeanor, totally unaffected by the wealthy crowd around him. Evelyn instantly knew he didn't belong in this world, and that intrigued her. In the midst of all the luxury and glitz he seemed so normal, and that was exactly what caught her attention. That sense of normalcy was everything Evelyn had been yearning for. She soon learned his name was Logan, and he worked as a waiter at the restaurant. Their paths crossed, though not by chance. Evelyn made sure of it. She accidentally left her purse behind, sparking a casual conversation at the bar. It didn't take much for her to create opportunities to talk to him. What made Logan different from everyone else was that he didn't treat her as some heiress or figure of power. He wasn't intimidated by her name or her wealth. He simply saw her as a person, not just Richard Calloway's daughter. What began as small, casual chats gradually grew into something deeper. Logan was unlike anyone she had ever known. He was humble, grounded, and kind, completely detached from the games of power and status that surrounded her daily life. For the first time, Evelyn felt like she was treated as an equal. And that was something she found incredibly refreshing, even liberating. With him, she wasn't the rich, pampered heiress. She was just Evelyn. Naturally, their relationship had to stay hidden. There was no way her father would ever approve of his daughter, the heir to his vast empire, getting involved with a waiter. So Evelyn and Logan found ways to meet secretly. Late-night walks, quiet dinners, and drives out to the coast, places far removed from her usual surroundings. In those stolen moments, Evelyn felt free in a way she never had before. Logan didn't care about her wealth or her family's status, and that only made her fall for him more. She could laugh, talk, and just feel like a normal person for the first time in ages. But even though she was savoring their secret time together, Evelyn knew the risks. Her father had eyes everywhere, especially within his own restaurants. It wouldn't be long before someone noticed her growing closeness to Logan and reported it back to Richard. The thought of what her father might do if he found out terrified her, but it also pushed her closer to Logan. She was done living under Richard's control. She was ready to fight for her own happiness, even if it meant going against the man who had dominated her life for so long. One evening, as they sat on the hood of Logan's old truck, parked on a cliffside overlooking the ocean, Evelyn rested her head on his shoulder. The cool breeze carried the salty scent of the sea, and the stars above twinkled brightly against the night sky. Moments like this were the ones Evelyn cherished the most. "I wish we didn't have to hide," she murmured softly, her voice barely rising above the sound of the waves below. Logan pulled her closer, wrapping his arm around her. "I know," he said. "But your dad," Evelyn sighed. "He'll never accept this. Us." Logan was quiet for a moment before he spoke. "Then we'll find a way. I won't lose you, Evelyn. We'll figure something out. I promise." His words brought a spark of hope to her. But deep down, she knew their time of secrecy couldn't last forever. Richard was a man who always got what he wanted, and he wouldn't let something as simple as love stand in the way of his carefully planned future for his daughter. Still, Evelyn couldn't bring herself to let go of the one person who made her feel truly alive. With each hidden meeting, whether a late-night phone call or a quiet moment in the park, Evelyn's heart raced. She had never felt this way before. For the first time, she wasn't living according to her father's strict rules. She was doing something for herself, something that made her feel free and alive. But no matter how much she treasured their time together, the fear of Richard finding out hung heavily over her. Logan, on the other hand, stayed calm. He didn't come from a world of high expectations or oppressive pressure. He knew how to live simply and enjoy the little moments. That was something Evelyn admired when she was with him. He made her feel like she could finally breathe. But even Logan couldn't fully grasp how severe the consequences would be if Richard ever discovered their relationship. One evening, after sneaking away from a charity gala, Evelyn met Logan in a quiet corner of the city park. The air was crisp, and the stars were veiled by a thin layer of clouds. Logan waited beneath a towering oak tree, his hands casually tucked into his pockets, his gaze directed toward the sky. Seeing him standing there, so still and at ease, made Evelyn's heart swell with affection. "I can't stay long," she said, her voice low as she approached, glancing over her shoulder as though she expected someone to be trailing behind her. Logan smiled gently and reached out to take her hand. "It's okay. I'm just happy you're here." They walked together in comfortable silence, their footsteps crunching softly on the gravel path beneath them. There was something about the quiet of the night that made their secret meetings feel even more intimate, as if they were the only two people in the world. But even in these peaceful moments, the weight of their reality never fully faded. "Do you ever think about what will happen if your father finds out?" Logan asked, his voice quiet and serious. Evelyn hesitated, the question bringing a familiar dread. It was one she had asked herself countless times, but the answer always filled her with fear. "I don't know," she admitted. "He's not just overprotective, he's controlling," she continued, her voice tinged with concern. "If he finds out about us, I don't know what he'll do." Logan tightened his grip on her hand, his touch offering comfort. "I won't let anything happen to you, Evelyn. We'll figure this out, whatever it takes." But as much as Logan's words reassured her, the truth was, Evelyn wasn't just afraid of her father's wrath. Her biggest fear was losing Logan. She had seen firsthand how her father handled situations where things didn't go his way. Richard wasn't a man who tolerated disobedience, especially from his own daughter. Things took a turn a few days later when one of the restaurant staff noticed Evelyn spending more time with Logan. The rumor spread quickly, and before long, whispers of a romance between the heiress and the waiter reached the ears of Richard's business partners. None of them dared to confront him directly, but the tension was undeniable. It was only a matter of time before someone close to Richard brought it up, and Evelyn could feel the pressure mounting. She knew she couldn't keep sneaking around forever. As much as she loved Logan, the constant secrecy and the weight of their situation started to wear on her. She didn't want to lose him, but she also didn't want to live in fear and hiding. The more she thought about it, the more trapped she felt. But no matter how hard she tried, she couldn't think of a way out that didn't end in disaster. Logan, however, refused to let their circumstances dictate their future. He was determined to find a way for them to be together, no matter the obstacles. "You're worth fighting for," he told her one evening after they had shared a quiet dinner at a small, out-of-the-way diner. "I don't care what your father thinks. I don't care how hard it gets. I'm not giving up on us. Evelyn's heart ached at his words, torn between the overwhelming love she felt for him and the dread of what lay ahead. As they finished their meal, the tension between them eased for a moment, replaced by the simple joy of being together. They sat in the dimly lit booth, talking for hours about their dreams and the life they wanted to build. A life free from the suffocating expectations of wealth and status. But even in that warm moment, they both knew their time in the shadows was running out. Evelyn knew it was inevitable. Her father would eventually find out. One evening, as they sat together on Logan's couch in his modest apartment, Evelyn's phone began buzzing incessantly. She glanced at the screen, her stomach sinking as she saw several missed calls from her father. Her heart raced with anxiety. Richard never called her this many times unless something was wrong. I have to go, Evelyn said, her voice trembling slightly. Logan looked at her, concern clouding his face. Do you think he knows? He asked. Evelyn bit her lip, feeling the weight of the question settle heavily in her chest. I don't know, she whispered. But I'm afraid to find out. That night, Evelyn left Logan's apartment with a heavy heart, knowing their time of secrecy was quickly running out. Although they had promised to fight for their love, she felt the storm approaching, and it was only a matter of time before it reached them. The next morning, the sunlight filtered through the curtains as Evelyn sat on the edge of her bed, her heart racing. She knew she couldn't avoid her father any longer. After a restless night, the tension was unbearable. Richard had left countless missed calls on her phone, and each one felt like a countdown to an inevitable confrontation. With every passing second, she felt closer to facing her father and the fallout from her relationship with Logan. Taking a deep breath, Evelyn stood up and smoothed down her dress, her hands trembling slightly. The time had come. This confrontation had been building for weeks, and now there was no avoiding it. Richard was the kind of man who didn't let anything slide, especially when it came to her. Evelyn knew it was time to face the consequences. As she descended the grand staircase, the polished marble beneath her feet gleamed coldly, mirroring the knot in her stomach. She could already hear Richard's voice coming from his office, low and serious, likely discussing business matters with one of his many associates. But when she entered the doorway, the conversation came to an abrupt halt. Richard looked up, his piercing blue eyes locking onto hers. Evelyn, he said, his voice flat. Sit down. We need to talk. Her heart hammered in her chest as she complied, sinking into the leather armchair across from his desk. The air felt thick with tension, and she could almost feel the weight of his scrutiny pressing down on her. I've been hearing some very interesting things lately, Richard began, his voice calm but with an edge that made Evelyn's skin crawl. Rumors? Really? I want to hear from you if there's any truth to them. Evelyn swallowed hard, her throat suddenly dry. She had known this moment was coming, but hearing her father speak the words made it all feel so much more real. I've been told you've been seeing one of the staff. Logan, I believe his name is. Evelyn froze. There it was, the truth laid bare, and there was nowhere left to hide. Her father had discovered everything she had feared. For a moment she considered lying, denying it all, pretending nothing had happened. But Evelyn wasn't the type to back down. She knew Logan deserved far better than to be hidden behind lies. Yes, Dad, she said, her voice barely a whisper. I've been seeing Logan. The room fell eerily silent. Richard's expression didn't change, but a coldness seemed to settle around him. He slowly stood up, walking around his desk to stand directly in front of her. His presence towered over her, casting a shadow that made the space feel even more oppressive. Evelyn braced herself for the explosion she knew was coming. Do you have any idea what you're doing? Richard's voice was low, but anger simmered just below the surface. Do you understand what this could do to you? To us? You're throwing away everything I've built. Evelyn's hands clenched tightly in her lap, her nails digging into her palms. I'm not throwing anything away, Dad. I love him. Logan isn't like the people you surround yourself with. He cares about me for who I am, not because of your money or your name. Richard let out a bitter laugh. Love, he scoffed. You think this is about love? This is about you being manipulated by some nobody who sees you as his way out. A ticket to a better life. Evelyn's heart sank. She had expected anger, but the cruelty in his words took her by surprise. Logan isn't like that, she insisted, her voice shaking. He doesn't care about money. He doesn't care about any of that. Richard's voice boomed, cutting her off. He stepped closer, his face now inches from hers. You will end this. This absurd fling. I didn't raise you to be a fool, Evelyn. You will marry someone worthy of this family. Someone who understands what it means to be a Calloway. Tears welled up in Evelyn's eyes, but she fought them back. She wasn't a child anymore. She couldn't let her father control her life forever. For so long she had bent to his will, following the path he had set for her. But this time was different. This time she had to stand up for herself, for her own happiness. I won't end it, Dad, Evelyn said firmly, her voice steady despite the fear curling in her gut. I love Logan, and I'm not walking away from him just because you don't approve. Richard's eyes narrowed, and the anger that had been simmering inside him finally erupted. If you continue down this path, you will regret it, Evelyn, he warned, his voice cold. I won't allow you to throw your life away for some waiter. His words stung, but Evelyn stood her ground. It's my life, not yours. You can't control me forever. For a moment Richard's face hardened, and Evelyn feared he might lash out at her. But instead he stepped back, his expression unreadable and icy. Fine, he said coldly. But if you go through with this, you'll no longer be a part of this family. No more support, no more inheritance. You'll have nothing. Evelyn's heart clenched at the finality of his words, but she didn't let it show. She had made her choice, and despite the pain, she wasn't going to back down now. I'd rather have nothing and be with someone I love than live my life by your rules. Richard stared at her for a long, tense moment before turning away. You're making a mistake, he said quietly, his voice barely a whisper. A mistake you'll never recover from. Evelyn stood up, her legs trembling beneath her, and walked out of the room without looking back. She knew there was no turning back now. As she left her father's office, her mind was spinning. The heavy door clicked shut behind her, and the mansion felt colder than ever. Its vastness, once a source of comfort, now felt like an oppressive reminder of the rift that had just opened between them. Her father's ultimatum loomed over her. Either continue with Logan and lose everything, or end it and remain in the life she had always known. But how could she go back to that life now? How could she abandon the one person who made her feel truly free? Over the next few days, the tension in the Calloway household grew unbearable. Richard stopped speaking directly to Evelyn, choosing instead to communicate through the staff. And whenever their paths crossed, his icy glares made it painfully clear that the distance between them was widening. The rest of Charleston's elite caught wind of the scandal, and whispers about the Calloway heiress and her relationship with a lowly waiter began to spread. It didn't take long for the pressure to mount from all sides. At one of the many charity events Evelyn was expected to attend, her father's business associates and their wives greeted her with tight smiles, their eyes full of judgment. The whispers followed her everywhere, each one sharper than the last. Did you hear? Richard's daughter is dating a waiter? I heard Richard is furious. She's going to ruin everything. Evelyn held her head high, pretending not to hear the murmurs. She had always been the perfect daughter, the model hostess, never stepping out of line. But now she was the subject of gossip. It was clear that her father's social circle was turning against her. The weight of their judgment felt suffocating, but Evelyn refused to let it break her. She had chosen Logan, and she wasn't going to let anyone make her doubt that decision. Richard, however, wasn't about to let things slide without a fight. He began to use his power to pressure Logan from behind the scenes. It started with subtle tactics, extra shifts at the restaurant, sudden schedule changes, and rumors about Logan's supposed unreliability. His co-workers began to gossip, questioning why he was still employed, especially with all the rumors swirling about him and Evelyn. One afternoon, Logan received a call from his manager, Kurt. The voice on the other end informed him that he was being transferred to a less desirable location, away from the heart of Charleston where the tips were good and the clientele wealthy. It was a clear demotion, though no reason was given. Logan knew better. This was Richard Calloway's doing. An attempt to push him out of Evelyn's life by making things as difficult as possible. When Logan told Evelyn about the demotion, her heart sank. She had known her father wouldn't sit idly by, but seeing the direct consequences of his actions was more painful than she had expected. "This is just the beginning," Logan said, trying to keep his voice steady. "He's going to do everything in his power to make sure we don't stay together." Evelyn's hands trembled with anger, but she refused to let the frustration overwhelm her. "He can't control everything," Evelyn declared with fierce determination. "He doesn't get to dictate who I love." But Logan wasn't as hopeful. Having grown up in a very different world from hers, he knew exactly how powerful people like Richard could be. They didn't give up easily. "Evelyn," he said softly, his voice laced with concern as he took her hand, "I don't want you to get hurt. He's your father, and he has resources I can't compete with." Evelyn's gaze hardened with resolve. "I don't care about his resources," she said, her voice unwavering. "I don't care about money or power. I care about you." Logan smiled faintly, but the worry in his eyes remained. "I won't let him come between us," he said, squeezing her hand gently. "But we need to be strategic. He won't stop until he gets his way." As the days went by, the pressure from Richard only increased. He started parading potential suitors in front of Evelyn, each one more polished, more refined than the last. Every week there was a new man in her life, dressed to the nines in designer suits, offering her a life of endless luxury, status, and influence. Richard didn't need to say it outright, but the message was unmistakable. Any one of these men would be a better match for you than Logan. Evelyn endured each of these meetings with a polite smile, offering only the barest responses, her thoughts firmly elsewhere. Her father's attempts at pushing her into a convenient marriage only fueled her defiance. These men were exactly what she didn't want: shallow, arrogant, and obsessed with her family's wealth. None of them cared for her as a person, only for what she represented. But Logan cared for her, really cared. One evening, after another particularly grueling dinner with one of her father's chosen suitors, Evelyn's frustration finally boiled over. She stormed into Richard's study, the door slamming behind her. He looked up briefly from his papers, his expression as cold and unreadable as ever. "I assume this is about our guest tonight?" he asked, his voice flat. "No," Evelyn snapped, her voice cracking with anger. "This is about you trying to control every part of my life. I told you I'm not interested in these men. I'm with Logan, and I'm not changing that just to fit your plans." Richard's gaze finally locked with hers, sharp and calculating. "Logan is not part of this family," he stated, his voice steady and final. "And he never will be. You'd be wise to accept that and move on." Evelyn's heart raced in her chest. "This isn't about family, Dad. This is about you controlling everything. But I'm not a child anymore. I can make my own decisions. And I've chosen Logan." Richard stood slowly, his movements deliberate and imposing as he stepped away from the desk. "You're throwing away everything for someone with nothing to offer you," he said, his voice cold as ice. "I'd rather have nothing and be with someone I love than live a life where I'm just another pawn in your games," Evelyn shot back. The air between them was thick with tension, a palpable crackling energy that made it clear neither of them was willing to budge. Evelyn knew this was just the beginning of a much bigger fight. Her fight for independence, for the life she wanted. The war for control had begun, and Logan could feel it pressing down on them both. Despite the love they shared, Richard's influence was everywhere, casting long shadows over their relationship. Logan had begun to grasp just how far Richard would go to maintain his grip. This wasn't just a clash of wills, it was a battle for control, and Richard wasn't about to lose. Logan had never expected to find himself in such a situation. Raised in a world where wealth and power were foreign concepts, he had always been content with the simple life he had. His job as a waiter, though unglamorous, was enough. It allowed him to live without the weight of expectation or scrutiny. But being with Evelyn had thrown him into a battle he never imagined. He was no longer just trying to live his life. He was at the center of a fight far beyond anything he'd ever known. One night, as they sat together in Logan's modest apartment, the pressure finally took its toll. The soft light from the lamp on the table cast long, deep shadows, making the small space feel even more suffocating. Evelyn rested her head on his shoulder, absently tracing patterns on the fabric of his shirt, their peaceful moments starkly contrasting with the tension looming over them. "I've been thinking," Logan began, breaking the silence. Evelyn looked up, sensing the seriousness in his voice. "About what?" Logan paused, choosing his words carefully. "About us. About everything that's happening with your father. It's getting harder, Evelyn." Her brow furrowed with concern. "I know it's tough, but we'll get through this. We just have to stick together." Logan shook his head slowly, frustration evident in his movements. "It's not just about sticking together, Evelyn. Your father is making everything impossible. He's pulling strings at the restaurant, whispering to people behind my back. And now they've transferred me to another location. It's all part of his plan to push me out of your life completely. He's not going to stop until he gets what he wants." Evelyn's heart dropped. She had known Richard was interfering, but hearing how deeply it was affecting Logan's life made her stomach turn. "I'm so sorry, Logan. I didn't realize it was this bad." Logan took her hand, holding it firmly. "It's not your fault. But I'm worried about what he'll do next. He's not just targeting me. He's targeting us. And I don't want you to have to choose between me and your family." Evelyn's resolve grew even stronger. "I've already made my choice. I chose you. My father can't control my life anymore." Logan smiled weakly, appreciating her strength, but doubt still lingered in his eyes. "You say that now. But what happens when things get worse? He won't back off, Evelyn. He's going to keep coming after us. And I don't know if I can keep asking you to endure all of this. I don't want to be the reason you lose everything." Evelyn's heart tightened at the thought, but she knew deep down that leaving Logan wasn't an option. As difficult as things were, she couldn't walk away from him now. "You're not the reason I'd lose anything, Logan," Evelyn said firmly, her voice full of conviction. "I'm not losing anything by being with you. I'm gaining freedom, love. Everything my father could never offer me." Logan sighed, clearly torn. He loved her with all his heart, but something in him worried he was pulling her into a battle she never asked for. I don't want to see you hurt," he admitted. Evelyn leaned forward, resting her forehead gently against his. "I'd rather face all of this with you than live without you. We'll figure it out together." For a moment, the weight of everything seemed to vanish. They sat there, wrapped in each other's arms, feeling like the world outside couldn't touch them. But despite that comfort, Logan couldn't shake the thought that maybe the best thing he could do for Evelyn was to step aside and let her go. Over the next few days, Logan found himself trapped in his thoughts, wrestling with a painful decision. He loved Evelyn more than life itself, but the more he thought about their situation, the more he wondered if letting her go might be the only way to protect her from her father's wrath. Richard's power seemed unshakable, and Logan feared that, as long as they stayed together, Evelyn would continue to suffer under his influence. One evening, Logan sat alone in his apartment, staring at his phone, unable to dial Evelyn's number. He had considered telling her what was on his mind, but the words felt impossible to find. He couldn't bear the idea of causing her pain, but wasn't it better to hurt her now in the short term, than to drag her through a lifetime of misery caused by Richard's interference? Just as he was lost in these thoughts, a knock at the door broke his concentration. He opened it to find Evelyn standing there, her expression filled with concern. She could sense something was wrong. Logan had been distant, and the thought of losing him without understanding why was unbearable. "Logan," she said softly, stepping inside. "What's going on? You've been so quiet lately, and I'm worried." Logan lowered his gaze, unable to meet her eyes. "I've just been thinking," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "About everything. About us. I don't know if I'm strong enough to keep fighting your father." Evelyn reached out, gently lifting his chin so their eyes met. We're stronger together, Logan. Don't you see that? I don't care what my father does. I want to be with you. I love you. Logan's resolve faltered as he looked into her eyes, filled with love and unwavering determination. He had been ready to make the hardest decision of his life, but standing there with Evelyn, he realized that leaving wasn't the answer. They had something worth fighting for, something her father could never understand. I love you too, Logan whispered, pulling her close. And I'm not going anywhere. Together they faced an uncertain future, but one thing was certain. Their love was stronger than Richard's control, and they weren't going to let him tear them apart. The weight of their decision was heavy, and the consequences of standing up to Richard were unclear, but both Evelyn and Logan knew one thing. They could no longer live in fear. Richard's influence in Charleston was suffocating, and every moment of their relationship was clouded by his disapproval. Evelyn had grown tired of fighting against the inevitable. She knew that her father would never relent, and there was no future for them in Charleston while Richard was pulling strings to tear them apart. They needed to take control of their own lives, and there was only one way to do that. It was Evelyn who came up with the plan. She'd been thinking about it for days, lying awake at night, staring at the ceiling, turning the options over in her mind. She feared what her father's wrath would bring, but deep down, she couldn't shake the feeling that this was the only way to finally be free. One evening, as they sat together in Logan's apartment, she turned to him with a steady voice, though her emotions ran deep. We need to leave, she said quietly. We need to get out of Charleston. Logan looked at her surprised. What do you mean? Evelyn took a deep breath, gathering her courage. We can't stay here, Logan. Not with my father constantly trying to control everything. We need to leave. Somewhere far away. Somewhere he can't reach us. Logan remained silent for a moment, letting the weight of her words sink in. He had thought about leaving before, but he wasn't sure Evelyn would actually be willing to go through with it. But hearing her say it out loud, he felt a flicker of hope. Maybe, just maybe, they could start fresh. A chance to finally have the life they wanted. Away from Richard's shadow. Are you sure? Logan asked softly, his voice full of concern. I don't want you to give up everything. I'm not giving up anything, Evelyn replied, her eyes filled with quiet determination. I'm choosing us. I'm choosing a life where we can be happy, where we don't have to constantly look over our shoulders. I don't care about the money, the status. I care about being with you. Logan's heart swelled at her words. In that moment, he knew they were in this together. They were going to build a life of their own, free from the manipulations of her father. The next few days were a whirlwind of secret preparations. They couldn't tell anyone about their plans. Not even the few close friends Evelyn had. Richard had eyes everywhere, and any hint of their departure would send him into a spiral. So they kept everything quiet, gathering only what they needed for a quick escape. Evelyn packed light, just a few clothes, some personal items, and the most important thing. Her mother's necklace, the only truly sentimental piece she had. The night they left, the air was thick with anticipation. Logan had borrowed a friend's car to avoid being followed, and they drove in silence for the first hour, neither of them wanting to speak in case it jinxed their escape. It wasn't until they crossed the state line into Georgia that Evelyn finally exhaled, leaning back in her seat and releasing a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. We're really doing this, Evelyn whispered, a mix of disbelief and relief in her voice. Logan glanced over at her, his lips curling into a soft smile. Yeah, we are. As they drove into Savannah, the city's historic charm embraced them like an old friend. The moss-covered oak trees, the cobblestone streets, and the quiet beauty of the old buildings felt like stepping into another world. One far from Richard's grasp, a place where they could truly be free. They found a small, cozy inn on the edge of the city to stay for the night. It was a far cry from the luxury Evelyn was used to, but in its simplicity it felt perfect. No expectations, no judgment, just the two of them in a space where they could start over. The next morning, Logan woke early, slipping out of bed to make plans for the day ahead. He knew Evelyn wanted something simple, a far cry from the extravagance that had defined her former life. He was determined to give her the day she deserved, one that was all about love and new beginnings. He found a small chapel on the outskirts of Savannah, perched near the river, its quiet charm exactly what they needed. When he returned to the inn, he found Evelyn sitting at the edge of the bed, still wide-eyed with the realization that they had actually done it. They had left Charleston behind, left her father's world behind. But as the plans for their wedding day began to sink in, nerves started to creep up on her. Logan could sense it. "Are you okay?" he asked, sitting beside her. Evelyn nodded, though her hands trembled slightly. It's all happening so fast." Logan smiled, taking her hands in his. "We don't have to do it today. We can wait if you need more time." Evelyn shook her head, her voice steady but filled with resolve. "No, I don't want to wait. I've waited long enough to be free. Let's do it. Let's get married today." And so they did. The ceremony was everything Evelyn had dreamed of. Nothing like the grand, over-the-top events she'd once attended in Charleston. There were no extravagant floral displays, no designer gowns, no cameras documenting every fleeting moment. It was just the two of them, standing in the quiet chapel, exchanging vows that were simple, heartfelt, and full of hope for the future. As they walked out of the chapel hand in hand, the late afternoon sun bathed the world in a golden glow, reflecting off the river's surface. Evelyn felt lighter than she had in years. This was their fresh start, their new life far from the shadows of the past. But just as they reached the steps, a figure appeared at the edge of the pathway. A man unfamiliar to Evelyn, but his presence, his serious, unwavering expression, made her uneasy. "Logan," the man called out, stepping forward with a purposeful stride. "There's something you need to know." Evelyn's heart skipped a beat, her grip tightening on Logan's hand as she looked up at him. Logan's body stiffened, his gaze sharpening as he stepped in front of her, positioning himself protectively. "What are you doing here, Paul?" Logan's voice was low, cautious, but tinged with something else, resentment perhaps or unease. Paul, tall and impeccably dressed in a sharp suit that looked out of place in the quiet chapel, didn't even glance at Evelyn. His focus was entirely on Logan. "I tried to reach you before, but you disappeared. I had no idea where you went until now. You can't keep running, Logan. It's time you faced the truth." The words hit Evelyn like a cold wave. She had never seen Logan like this before. His face paled, his body rigid with tension, and that terrified her more than anything. "What is he talking about?" Evelyn whispered, her voice trembling with fear. She squeezed Logan's hand tighter, needing reassurance, but he didn't answer immediately. Instead, he took a step forward, putting more distance between her and Paul. "Evelyn, is it?" Paul asked, now addressing her directly, his voice colder than before. "There's something you need to know about your new husband." Evelyn's stomach twisted. She had always known there were parts of Logan's life he hadn't shared with her, but they had built their relationship on trust, on the quiet understanding that they would face everything together. Now, as she stood at the threshold of their new life, she wasn't sure she was ready for whatever truth Paul was about to drop. Logan turned to face her, his expression filled with guilt and regret. "Evelyn, I was going to tell you everything. I swear, but not like this." His voice trailed off. "Tell me what?" Evelyn asked, her heart racing in her chest. Before Logan could answer, Paul cut in, his tone biting and unforgiving. "Logan isn't who he says he is. He's not just some simple waiter you met in Charleston. He's the heir to a fortune, one bigger than your father's. He walked away from his family's wealth to live a different life, but they've been trying to find him for years." The words hung in the air like a storm cloud. Evelyn's mind raced, struggling to process what Paul was saying. "Is this true?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Logan lowered his gaze, his face drawn with a mixture of shame and sorrow. "Yes, it's true," he admitted, his voice quiet, filled with pain. "I left my family's wealth behind because I didn't want that life. I didn't want the pressure, the expectations, the manipulation. I wanted something real, something that wasn't tied to money. And then I met you." Evelyn's world seemed to spin. Everything she thought she knew about Logan, about their relationship, was suddenly upended. She had chosen him for who he was, for the simple, genuine person she had fallen in love with. Now it felt like the ground had been ripped out from beneath her. "Why didn't you tell me?" she whispered, her voice thick with hurt and confusion. Logan took a step closer, reaching for her hand, but she pulled away. The pain in her chest was unbearable, the confusion swirling too fast. "Because I didn't want you to look at me the way everyone else does," Logan said, his voice cracking. "I didn't want you to think I was just another rich guy trying to escape. I needed you to love me for who I really am, not for the money I left behind." Evelyn's heart ached with the weight of his words. She had left everything behind for him, for this life of love and simplicity. But now, finding out that he had been hiding something so enormous from her, it felt like betrayal. Paul, sensing the emotional weight of the moment, spoke again, his voice more controlled. "Your family's been looking for you, Logan. They need you to come back and take your rightful place. They need you to help run the business." Logan's response was immediate, his voice resolute. "I'm not going back. I've told you this before. That life isn't for me." Evelyn watched the exchange in silence, her thoughts spinning. Was this why Logan had kept his past a secret? Was this the reason he had tried so desperately to escape Charleston? Paul let out a deep sigh, his posture sagging slightly as he continued. "You don't understand how serious this is. Your family's company is on the verge of collapse. They need you, Logan. You're the only one who can save it." Logan turned to Evelyn, his eyes filled with a desperate pleading. "I don't want that life. I want you. I don't care about the money or the company. I care about us." Evelyn's emotions churned violently. She had just married this man, thinking she knew him completely, only to have the ground beneath her shift violently. She had left everything behind for him, and now a new unthinkable truth was tearing through everything she had believed in. "Do you really expect me to trust you after this?" Evelyn whispered, taking a step back from Logan, the weight of the situation heavy on her chest. She needed space, a moment to breathe. Logan's face fell as he reached for her, his eyes pleading. "Evelyn, please don't do this. I just need time to think," she murmured, her voice barely audible. Without another word, she turned and walked down the chapel steps, leaving Logan and Paul standing in a painful silence. Her heart was in turmoil. This was supposed to be the happiest day of her life. She had married the man she loved, but now everything was in question. She had fought so hard to build a future with Logan, and now she wasn't sure if she could even trust him. What was she supposed to do now? Could she forgive him? Could she still build a life with him, knowing the truth about his past? And what would Richard do when he found out? She knew deep down that her father wouldn't take this revelation lightly. Unbeknownst to Evelyn, Richard had already been informed, his fury simmering as he prepared to take action. Evelyn walked slowly through the quiet streets of Savannah, her thoughts a tangled mess. The peaceful charm of the city did little to calm the storm inside her. How could Logan have kept something so monumental from her? How could the man she had fallen in love with hide a life so different from the one he had shared with her? As she found a small bench by the river, she sat down, her head buried in her hands. She had given up everything for him, left behind her family, her world, only to find herself once again caught in the very thing she had tried to escape. The world of wealth, of secrets, of manipulation. She had fought so hard for their love, and now it felt as though that love had been built on a lie. Back at the chapel, Logan stood frozen, watching her walk away. His heart ached as the reality of what had just happened began to settle over him. He had wanted to tell her the truth, but every time he came close, fear had stopped him. Now it seemed like his worst fear was coming true. Paul, still standing nearby, cleared his throat. "You should have told her sooner." Logan turned to face him, his expression hardening. "I didn't need you to show up and ruin everything." "I didn't ruin anything," Paul replied, crossing his arms. "You did that by keeping secrets. You knew this would come out eventually. You can't run from who you are forever." Logan clenched his fists, his frustration bubbling to the surface. "I didn't want that life, Paul. I didn't want any part of it. All I ever wanted was a normal life. Someone who loved me for me, not for my last name, not for the money. And you think you found that?" Paul shot back, his tone sharp. "But you built your relationship on a lie. Did you really think you could hide your past from her forever? Logan looked away, the guilt weighing on him. Paul was right. He should have told Evelyn the truth from the start. Now everything they had built was hanging by a thread, and he didn't know how to fix it. After a long silence, Logan spoke, his voice firm, though filled with finality. I'm not going back. Tell my family I'm done. I've made my choice. Paul shook his head, his frustration palpable. It's not that simple, Logan. The family business is in trouble. They need you. Logan snapped. I don't care. They can figure it out without me. I'm not their puppet anymore. Paul sighed deeply, clearly exasperated. You're walking away from everything. From your family, from your responsibility. Is that really the kind of man you want to be? Logan didn't answer. Instead, he turned and walked back into the chapel, needing space to think. Paul's words struck him deeply, more than he cared to admit. Was he really running away from his responsibility? Was he being selfish by abandoning his family's business? But even as those thoughts swirled in his mind, one thing was clear. He couldn't lose Evelyn. She was the one thing in his life that made sense, the only person who saw him for who he truly was. He had to make this right. Meanwhile, in Charleston, Richard Calloway was seething in his office. The news of Evelyn and Logan's elopement had reached him faster than he expected, and his rage was consuming. His fists clenched as he paced the room, his mind racing with thoughts of revenge. How could she do this? Richard muttered under his breath. After everything I've done for her. His assistant Rebecca stood by the door nervously watching him. She had never seen Richard so angry, and the tension in the room was almost suffocating. Get me everything we have on Logan, Richard ordered, his voice cold and menacing. I want to know everything about him. His background, his connections, everything. If he thinks he can take my daughter away from me, he's got another thing coming. Rebecca nodded quickly and left the room, leaving Richard alone with his thoughts as he stared out the window, already planning his next move. Paul's presence lingered in the air as Logan's mind raced, crafting plans to bring Evelyn back and destroy the man who had taken her from him. He couldn't let Logan's marriage to his daughter go unpunished. It was a grave mistake, and Richard wasn't going to let it slide. Meanwhile, Evelyn remained seated on the park bench, staring out at the river as the sun began to set. Her thoughts were tangled in a web of confusion and hurt. She hadn't noticed Logan approaching until he was standing next to her, his figure casting a long shadow. Can I sit? He asked softly. Evelyn glanced up at him, her heart heavy with everything that had transpired. She nodded silently, and Logan lowered himself beside her. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The only sounds were the distant hum of the city and the gentle lapping of the river against the shore. I'm sorry, Logan said quietly, his voice thick with emotion. I should have told you the truth from the start. I never wanted to hurt you, Evelyn. I didn't want you to see me the way everyone else does. Evelyn turned toward him, her eyes filled with a mixture of hurt and confusion. I don't understand, Logan. Why didn't you trust me with the truth? Logan took a deep breath, trying to find the words to explain himself. Because I've spent my whole life running from that world. The money, the pressure, the expectations, it's suffocating. I wanted to be someone else. I wanted to find something real. And with you I did. Evelyn's eyes softened, but the pain was still there. But you lied to me. How am I supposed to trust you now? Logan reached out for her hand, holding it gently. I know I broke your trust, and I'll spend the rest of my life making it up to you, if that's what it takes. But please, Evelyn, don't let this be the end of us. I love you. That's the only truth that's ever mattered to me. Evelyn looked down at their joined hands, her heart torn between love and betrayal. She still loved him, she couldn't deny that. But the hurt ran deep, and she needed time to process everything. I don't know, she whispered. I need time. Logan nodded, the weight of her words crushing him. Take all the time you need. I'll wait for you, Evelyn. I'm not going anywhere. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting a golden glow over the city, they sat in silence, the future uncertain, but their love still there. Fragile but alive. Later that evening they walked back to the inn, the peaceful streets of Savannah offering no solace to Evelyn's restless mind. She had always known Logan was different from the men in her father's world, that he wasn't just another entitled, wealthy man. That had been what had drawn her to him in the first place. But now, with this secret exposed, everything had changed. Once inside their room, the tension between them was palpable. Evelyn stood by the window, her back to Logan, gazing out at the darkened streets. Logan watched her quietly, unsure of what to say. He knew that no matter what words he chose, they wouldn't undo the hurt he had caused. Finally, Evelyn spoke, her voice soft but strained. "I still don't understand, Logan. You told me you wanted a simple life, but now I find out you left a fortune behind. Why didn't you just tell me the truth?" Logan took a deep breath, knowing this was the moment that could either make or break them. He walked over to her, stopping a few feet away, his hands clenched at his sides. "I didn't tell you because I didn't want that part of my life to define me or us. My family's wealth, it's not who I am. I walked away from it because it was suffocating. I didn't want to be another rich guy living off my family's money, and I didn't want to drag you into that world." Evelyn turned to face him, her eyes searching his for answers. "But you didn't give me a choice, Logan. You made that decision for me, and that's what hurts the most. I thought we were building something real, something honest. But now, I don't know." Her words hit Logan like a punch to the gut. He had never meant to deceive her, but he understood now how much his secrecy had cost them. "You're right," he admitted, his voice filled with regret. "I should have told you. I should have trusted you. But I was scared, Evelyn. I've seen how money ruins relationships, how people change when they find out there's a fortune involved. I didn't want that to happen to us. I didn't want you to look at me the way everyone else does." Evelyn crossed her arms, her expression softening but still conflicted. "I didn't fall in love with your money, Logan. I fell in love with you. The man who treated me like a person, not a name or a dollar sign. But now, I don't know if I can trust you. If you kept something this big from me, what else haven't you told me?" Logan stepped closer, his voice pleading. "There's nothing else, Evelyn. I swear this was the only secret. And I was wrong to keep it from you. But everything I've ever said to you, everything we've built together, that was real. I love you and I don't care about the money. I just want us to be together." Evelyn's heart ached with the weight of his words. She wanted to believe him, to go back to the simplicity of their love before all of this, but the doubt still lingered, gnawing at her. Could she truly trust him after everything? Could they rebuild what had been shattered? "I need time," she said again, her voice quieter now, almost pleading. "I just need to think." Logan nodded, his pain evident in his eyes. "I understand. Take all the time you need." Over the next few days in Savannah, things between them grew strained. There was a distance now, a quiet unease that neither of them could ignore. Evelyn spent her days walking through the city's historic squares, trying to clear her mind while Logan gave her the space she needed. Every minute apart felt like an eternity, and Logan was desperate to fix things, but he knew pushing her would only make things worse. As Evelyn wandered the peaceful streets, she thought about everything they had been through. Logan had been her escape, her chance at freedom from the suffocating world her father had built around her. With him she had felt real alive. But now, knowing the truth about his past, she felt pulled back into the very world she had tried to leave behind. She found herself sitting on a bench in Forsyth Park, staring at the fountain, the water spraying up in the air. Her mind was a whirlwind of emotions. Could she really walk away from Logan after everything they had been through? Despite the lies, one thing hadn't changed, she still loved him. But love wasn't always enough, was it? Her thoughts were interrupted by the sudden ringing of her phone. Evelyn's heart skipped as she glanced at the screen. Her father's name. She hadn't spoken to Richard since leaving Charleston, and the idea of talking to him now filled her with dread. Yet deep down something told her she couldn't avoid this forever. With a resigned sigh, she answered the call. "What do you want, Dad?" Richard's voice was as sharp as ever. "I want to know where you are, Evelyn. I heard about your little elopement. Do you really think you can run away from me? From this family?" Evelyn closed her eyes, bracing herself. "I didn't run away. I chose to be with someone I love. Love. Richard's tone was dripping with disdain. You think love is going to save you? Logan is just like every other man who's come into your life. He'll use you and leave you. And now I hear he's been lying to you about his past. Is that what you want? To be with a liar? The words stung, but Evelyn was resolute. She wasn't going to let him manipulate her again. Logan made mistakes, but he's not like you, Dad. He doesn't control people's lives. He doesn't treat me like a business asset. Richard's voice grew cold, his anger unmistakable. You're making a mistake, Evelyn. You're throwing away everything I've worked for. I'm not throwing anything away, Evelyn replied firmly. I'm choosing my own life, my own path, and you can't control me anymore. There was a long silence on the other end of the line. For a moment, Evelyn thought he might hang up, but then he spoke again, his tone eerily calm. We'll see about that. The line went dead and Evelyn sat there, her heart pounding. She had stood up to her father before, but this felt different. There was a finality to it now, a sense that she had crossed a line she couldn't uncross. But no matter what came next, she knew one thing. She wasn't going back. Later that evening, Evelyn returned to the inn, her mind clearer than it had been in days. She still didn't have all the answers, but she knew one thing for certain. She couldn't live in fear anymore. As she stepped inside, she found Logan sitting on the edge of the bed, his expression tired yet hopeful. Have you made your decision? He asked quietly. Evelyn nodded, her heart heavy but resolute. I'm not leaving you, Logan. But things have to change. No more secrets. No more lies. If we're going to make this work, we need to be honest with each other. Completely. Logan stood up and took her hands in his eyes filled with relief. No more secrets, he promised. I'm all in, Evelyn. Whatever it takes. Evelyn smiled softly, feeling a weight begin to lift from her shoulders. They still had a long road ahead of them, but for the first time since everything had come to light, she felt like they had a real chance. A chance to rebuild something lasting, something true. Their decision to start over, to rebuild their relationship from the ground up, brought a calm to their hearts that had been missing for days. Despite everything they had faced, despite the painful revelations that had nearly torn them apart, they found themselves more committed to each other than ever. But even as they focused on healing, Evelyn knew the shadow of her father still loomed large. Richard Calloway wasn't the kind of man who would be easily dismissed, and he had already made it clear that he wouldn't let her go without a fight. A week had passed since her tense conversation with Richard, and though Evelyn tried to focus on her future with Logan, the silence from her father was unsettling. She knew Richard well enough to understand that he wasn't the type to let things slide. His lack of response felt ominous, like the calm before a storm. One evening as the sun set, casting a warm golden glow over the city, a knock came at the door of the inn. Logan, who had been cooking dinner in the kitchenette, looked up from the stove, exchanging a wary glance with Evelyn. Visitors were rare here, and they hadn't told anyone where they were staying. Evelyn's stomach clenched with a familiar sense of dread. Could it be her father? Logan wiped his hands on a towel and moved to the door, opening it cautiously. Standing on the threshold was a familiar figure, Richard Calloway. His sharp, businesslike demeanor was still present, but there was something different about him now. The usual air of dominance and control that he carried seemed to have softened, replaced by something almost resembling vulnerability. "Dad," Evelyn said, her voice a mix of surprise and apprehension. "What are you doing here?" Richard scanned the small room, taking in the simplicity of their new life. It was a stark contrast to the world he had raised her in, and the difference wasn't lost on him. He stepped inside, closing the door gently behind him, but he remained standing, as if unsure of his place in this unfamiliar setting. "I came to talk," Richard said, his voice quieter than Evelyn had ever heard it, more subdued. "To both of you." Evelyn exchanged a glance with Logan, who stood silent but clearly tense. He had known this moment would come. Evelyn motioned for Richard to sit, though the tension in the air was thick. What was he here for? She wasn't sure, but she wasn't ready to let her guard down. "Not yet. What do you want to talk about?" Evelyn asked, her tone guarded. Richard let out a deep sigh, running a hand over his face in an almost uncharacteristic gesture of frustration. I made a mistake, Evelyn, he admitted, his words heavier than she had expected. I thought I was protecting you, doing what was best for you. But I can see now that I was wrong. Evelyn's eyes widened slightly. In all the years she had known her father, she had never heard him admit to being wrong. Richard Calloway was a man who prided himself on always being in control, always knowing what was best. Hearing him say these words felt surreal. I've spent my entire life building an empire, Richard continued, his gaze now shifting to Logan. I've worked to secure a future for you. But in doing that, I lost sight of what really matters. I thought that if I could control everything, you'd be safe. Richard's voice softened, betraying a rare vulnerability. I thought I was doing what was best for you, Evelyn. That you'd have the life I always wanted for you. But now, I see that I was suffocating you. Evelyn felt a flicker of something deep inside. A hint of empathy. But the years of control and manipulation still loomed over her. You didn't just suffocate me, Dad, she said, her voice low but firm. You tried to take away my choices. You tried to take away my freedom. You made it impossible for me to be with Logan. And you made me feel like I had to fight for everything that mattered to me. Richard nodded slowly, the weight of his own actions visibly weighing on him. I know. I see that now. I was blinded by my own fears. I thought Logan wasn't good enough for you because he wasn't part of the world I built for you. I judged him without knowing him, without understanding what he was about. I was wrong about him. Logan, who had remained quiet, listening intently, finally spoke. His voice was calm but resolute. I never meant to take Evelyn away from her family. I just wanted her to be happy. That's all I've ever wanted. Richard turned toward Logan, his gaze now shifting from anger to something almost like respect, mingled with guilt. I see that now, Richard said, his tone softer. I've made a lot of mistakes, and I'm asking for your forgiveness. Both of you. I know I've caused a lot of pain, and I'm not asking for things to change overnight. But I don't want to lose you, Evelyn. I don't want to lose my daughter. Evelyn leaned back, her mind a swirl of emotions. She had spent so many years wishing for this moment, wishing her father would see the error of his ways. But now that he was finally admitting his mistakes, she wasn't sure how to react. Could she forgive him? Could she trust that his words were genuine? Or was this just another way to manipulate the situation? I don't know, Dad, Evelyn said, her voice quiet, tinged with doubt. It's not that simple. You hurt me. You tried to control my life. You took away the one thing that made me feel free. Richard's face shifted, his usual bravado cracking for a brief moment. I know I hurt you, he said softly. I can't change what's been done, but I want to try to make things right. If you'll let me. I want to be part of your life, Evelyn. Your life with Logan. If you'll have me. Evelyn looked at Logan, her heart in a mess of contradictions. She knew this decision was hers alone to make, but she couldn't help but glance at him for reassurance. Logan's gaze met hers, steady but understanding. He knew better than to pressure her. Whatever choice she made, he would stand by her. Taking a deep breath, Evelyn felt the weight of her father's words settle around her. I need time to think, she said finally, her voice steady but filled with exhaustion. This is a lot to take in. Richard nodded, his face showing a fleeting sense of hope. I understand. Take all the time you need. I just wanted you to know. I'm sorry. With that, Richard rose from his seat, his posture less imposing than usual. He gave Logan a small, respectful nod, to which Logan responded with a quiet acknowledgement. Without another word, Richard turned and left, leaving Evelyn and Logan alone in the room. Evelyn sat in silence for what felt like an eternity. The apology she had dreamed of was finally here, but it didn't wash away the years of hurt. It didn't undo the control, the manipulation, the feeling of being suffocated. She knew that forgiveness wasn't something she could grant so easily, but at least for the first time in a long time she felt like healing might be possible. Logan reached for her hand, squeezing it gently. Whatever you decide, he said softly, his voice steady and full of love. I'm with you. Evelyn smiled, the warmth of his words filling her with reassurance. I know. And that's all I need right now. In the days that followed Richard's unexpected visit, Evelyn's mind was in a whirlwind. Though she had longed for her father's acknowledgement and apology, it felt like too little too late. Forgiveness wasn't something she was ready to offer just yet. But what she knew without a doubt was that her future was with Logan. Together they would face whatever came next. One afternoon, as they walked hand in hand through the historic streets of Savannah, Evelyn felt a subtle shift in the air. The weight of the past didn't feel as heavy anymore. The cobblestones beneath their feet, the soft breeze carrying the scent of magnolias in bloom. It all felt like the beginning of something new. Something that was theirs to build. Logan glanced at her, sensing the change in her mood. You seem lighter today, he said with a smile. Evelyn squeezed his hand, returning his smile. I feel lighter. I think I'm starting to let go of everything that's been holding me down. They walked in companionable silence for a while, the peacefulness of the city wrapping around them like a blanket. The future, which had seemed so uncertain, now felt full of possibility. Together they had built something real. Together they could face whatever challenges lay ahead. As they reached the edge of Forsyth Park, Logan stopped, turning to face her. His expression was serious, but his eyes carried the same love and warmth that had first drawn Evelyn to him. I've been thinking, Logan said, his voice soft but steady, about what comes next for us. We've talked about leaving Charleston behind, about starting fresh. But I want to know what you want, Evelyn. What kind of life do you want to build with me? Evelyn's heart swelled as she looked at him. It wasn't just the question, it was the way he asked it, with such genuine care without any pressure. For so long, her life had been dictated by her father's plans, by the weight of his expectations. But now, here with Logan, she finally had the chance to choose. The choice was hers. But now, standing there with Logan, Evelyn realized that for the first time, the choice was entirely hers. I want a life that feels real, she said, her voice unwavering, full of conviction. I don't care about the money or the status. I want a life where we wake up every day and feel like we're living for ourselves, not for anyone else. I want a home somewhere, she continued, her eyes focused on him. Somewhere we can just be us, without all the pressure of the world we came from. Logan smiled, his chest swelling with pride at the woman before him. I want that too. More than anything. The rest of the afternoon was spent dreaming together, talking about what they truly wanted for the future. They imagined a house in Savannah, small and cozy, where they could build a life that was just their own. Evelyn had always pictured a simple home, a garden she could tend to, a place to feel grounded. She imagined a life where they could breathe freely, far from the weight of wealth and expectations that had once haunted her every step. But as they shared their plans and hopes, Evelyn couldn't shake the thoughts of her father. Richard had apologized, yes, but she knew that healing their relationship would take time, if it could ever truly heal. Evelyn hadn't told Logan yet, but a part of her wanted to reach out to Richard again. Maybe there was a way forward, not as the controlling father and obedient daughter, but as equals. Perhaps they could rebuild something, this time based on mutual understanding. Not the world Richard had forced on her, but something that would allow them both to stand on equal ground. That evening, after returning to the inn, Evelyn found herself sitting on the edge of the bed, staring out the window at the soft glow of the streetlights below. Logan was in the kitchen finishing dinner, but she barely heard the sounds around her. Her mind was far away, on her father, on the past, and on the future she and Logan were working to build. Finally, she reached for her phone, her heart racing as she scrolled through her contacts, pausing when she saw her father's name. The last conversation they'd had been charged with so much emotion, so much unresolved tension. But now, with a little distance, Evelyn felt ready to take the next step, whatever that step might be. She pressed the call button, holding her breath as the phone rang. After a few rings, Richard's voice came on the other end, cautious but hopeful. Evelyn. Hi, Dad, she said, her voice steady, though the emotions were still raw. I've been thinking about what you said, about how you want to make things right. Richard fell silent for a moment, clearly surprised by the call. I meant every word, Evelyn. I know I've hurt you, and I want to do whatever it takes to fix that. Evelyn swallowed, the emotion still sitting heavily in her chest, but her resolve was stronger. I'm not ready to forgive everything yet, but I do want to try. I want to see if we can rebuild something, on different terms this time. There was a deep sigh of relief from the other end. I'd like that. I know it'll take time, but I'm willing to do whatever it takes. They spoke for a while longer, carefully navigating the delicate ground of their new relationship. It wasn't perfect, not by a long shot, but it was a start. And for Evelyn, that was enough. When she ended the call, a strange sense of peace settled over her. She had taken the first step toward healing her relationship with her father, but more importantly, she had reclaimed control of her own life. She had chosen Logan, chosen their future together, and now she was choosing to move forward. Not just with him, but in every part of her life. Logan walked over, handing her a plate of dinner, and sitting beside her on the bed. "Everything okay?" he asked, sensing the change in her mood. Evelyn smiled, the weight of the past lightening just a little. "Yeah, everything's okay." As they ate together, talking and laughing, the tension of the past seemed to melt away. Their future was theirs to shape, and for the first time in a long time, Evelyn felt truly free. She had fought for her happiness, for her love, and now, standing on the other side of that struggle, she knew that the life ahead of her was worth living. It was her life built on her terms with the man she loved by her side.